All right, welcome to episode 53 of the At Bat Podcast presented by WARR Media, where we give you our thoughts on the latest Chicago baseball news as well as take a trip around the league. I am Saul Rodriguez. This week, I am joined by Gave Wilkins himself, who, of course, you can see on Open Run Podcast, talking all things basketball. How we doing, Gave?
I'm doing excellent, man. The NBA season is complete, and it's on and popping in the summertime, getting a chance to watch some of these MLB games. A lot of tight division races. AL East is more competitive than it's ever been. When with this balanced schedule, I think we're going to see a lot of up and down, you know, standings over the next several weeks. So I'm excited to talk baseball with you, and especially on both sides of town where in spite of the records between the two squads, they still in the thick of the races going down in the NL and the AL Central, two of arguably the worst divisions in baseball. But you got to be blessed to take it if you're a North Side fan or a South Side fan.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? Speaking of that, too, because you're saying the NBA season is over, how insulting are those memes where they're like, where people are like, oh, like it's the dog days of summer where there's nothing to watch. I'm like, the disrespect.
I don't get it either, because in the summer you got so much going on. Even if you're a basketball fan, like you got the pro-am. And then if you a baseball fan, you got division races going on. And you got a lot of great young talent across Major League Baseball right now. You take a Stuart Ruiz with 33 stolen bases to date. He's on pace to get over 70 plus stolen bases this season in Oakland. That's something that those fans haven't seen since the days of Ricky Henderson. You got Ronald Acuna Jr., who's on the verge of becoming the first player in the history of the sport to hit not only 30 home runs, but still 60 plus stolen bases in a season. And being an exclusive member of the 30-60 club, boy, would that be quite a feat to see. And then last but not least, you got Luis Ariz hitting on a tear and on the verge of becoming the first man since Ted Williams to hit for 400 in a single season. So you got a lot going on in this sport right now that's making for a phenomenal watch, even in spite of some injuries to some of the game's top stars, such as Aaron Judge and Yordan Alvarez out in Houston, who's going to be out for over a month or so with an oblique injury.
And man, and what's wild is that that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like what you mentioned, there's still way more than that, right? And it's like people don't realize that. They don't even try to pay attention to it, because everyone's always it's always the generic, oh, baseball's boring, blah blah. But it's like it's one of those things where it's like people just don't get it, so they just don't watch it. So I mean, it is what it is. It's always gonna be people like that. But I'm like, man, I wish people could know like how intense summer baseball is. But they're lost, right? But but no, I mean, well, obviously you haven't been here in a minute, Gabe, but we've seen each other, and we talked about it a little bit when I saw you in Detroit. I mentioned that. And again, we talked about it when I saw you in the Marlins series as well. And we'll get into all things White Sox. So that's particularly what I want to get into today. But we'll start off a little bit with the North side with the Cubs that are 30-37. They went 4-6 on their road trip. Disappointing road trip, but they ended up finishing it off with the Giants series win. They were swept by the Angels, and then now they come back home, kind of continuing that momentum from that series win against the Giants and beat the Pirates, the first place Pirates, 2 games out of 3. They're looking for the sweep right now as we're currently recording this on a Thursday. They're in the second inning of that game. But overall, Gabe, what have you heard from people that are Cubs fans in your life? Like anything in particular that you've taken from the last week from the Cubs, or even since you've been on? Obviously, since you've been on, I'm pretty sure the last time you were on, the Cubs were still like kind of a little bit on the up or a little bit on the low, barely starting off, because in the last month and a half, it's just been inconsistent. I wouldn't say it's like horrible. It's just super inconsistent where you get a couple wins in a row and then they lose like 4 in a row and it's blah, blah, blah. But yeah, what do you make of the Cubs as we sit here in the middle of June?
Well, based off what I've seen, they still have a chance. And that's all you can ask for. And like I said, they play in the National League Central. This is by far the worst division in the National League. No different than the Central and the American League. And what I've been impressed with thus far is how they've managed to take the momentum that they gained from their 3-game series out in San Fran into their home stand, starting out against a division rival in Pittsburgh, who coming into this week, 6 of their 9 games were going to be against. And for them to, take the first 2 and scored 10 plus runs in doing so. That's huge, especially when you consider what they did in the second game of that 3-game set against Pittsburgh, where you had Mike Tauschner coming through with a bases clearing double late in the bottom of the 7th. And then that's followed up by Ian Happ coming through with a big time hit to give him the lead. And then Seiya Suzuki adds some key insurance runs with a double of his own late in that game at the bottom of the 8th. You need wins like that. And you need your offense to step up for you, especially when your pitching has been so up and down, and you haven't really been able to get too much out of those guys, with the exception of Marcus Stroman, who's having a hell of a season, but is currently in the midst of trying to, as you and I know, get a new contract extension from the Cubs. But I like what I'm seeing. I like the fight. And if they could find a way to close out Pittsburgh at home with a sweep, with Stroman on the mound as we're currently recording this, that's huge, especially going into a big series this weekend against Baltimore, who is one of the best young teams, not only in all of baseball, but giving the Rays a run for their money in the American League East, and are showing no signs of slowing down. It's guys like Gunnar Henderson, Austin Hayes, Adley Rutschman are continuing to do their jobs in spite of the absence of Cedric Mullins.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it, we talked about it a little bit before we came on, and really it's, I mean, you mentioned the pitching before we came on, and that's been a little bit of their Achilles heel, and it's mostly just been the bullpen. Like, the bullpen's been the one that's been disappointing. The starting pitching, of course, it hasn't been as good as it was in April, but Stroman's been consistent enough. Obviously, he's a Cy Young candidate. Steele has been consistent. Obviously he went on the IL, but I'm sure he's going to come back, I think this weekend, they said, and they have a TBD on Saturday. So most likely he'll come back and face the Orioles. So that'll be good to see. But overall, yeah, it's been the bullpen. I mean, the bullpen has been so bad, and they're like the only light in the tunnel is the fact that Alzolay has been good at the end of the games now, like the past couple of weeks. So he's a nice closing candidate there, and I think they'll keep him there until he messes up. Cody Hoyer also is the guy that we're waiting for him to come back. And I believe they said he's going to start his rehab soon enough. I don't exactly know when, but they keep asking Jen, and he says that he's going to start his rehab soon. But yeah, I mean, that's the light at the end of the tunnel for those guys that have been struggling overall, because Mark Leiter, he was really good, man. He was one of the best relievers in the game for the first month and a half, and then he just went way downhill. So that doesn't help the situation. And the thing is too is, and we've talked about this, I was actually on Sports Zone Chicago with Sean Sierra and all them, and we talked about how, like, everyone just coming for David Ross's head. And, like, it's kind of like the same way I feel about Pedro Grifo, like in April, when people were talking smack about him. It's like, at the end of the day, it's the players go out there and play. And also nowadays, because people complaining about, and they were complaining a lot about the lineup setup for the Sox as well as the Cubs too. And it's like a lot of now, I'm not saying that I'm not going to sit here and say they're puppets or anything, but like a lot of the times now, front offices are the ones telling them what to do with their lineups. So I'm not going to sit here and just blame it on that guy. And that's the same thing I feel about David Ross. And I've heard plenty of people say, and I said this too, is that I want to see people do better with the bullpen we have. I bet you can't, because when you have a bad bullpen, it's like everyone's bad. Like you can't do much better than that. He's putting the guys that they're giving. You have to handle the cards you were dealt. So it's just that's the situation with David Ross. And you mentioned Stroman and with the whole contract thing, and they talked to Jed, and he didn't seem very happy with the way that Stroman kind of aired out the I guess you would say the dirty laundry with the fact that they're not talking. But I don't blame Stroman whatsoever. I think it's frustration from his end. I think he wants to be here, and I think he's probably mad that he hasn't gotten any conversations and all that. And I will say this too, is that it seemed like that with Hap, before Hap got the extension, they asked Hap, and Hap also, which is funny, right? It's kind of like a double standard we can get into, because Ian Happ actually said the same thing on an interview, and he said it like and on a podcast, I believe too, that like they didn't have any conversations with them at all. That's all he said. Kind of like what Stroman was saying, and nobody said anything about Ian Happ airing that out. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that ended up being still, and there ended up being an extension anyway. So I'm still confident the Cubs could get something going. But anyways, what I want to ask you is, do you think that they're going to re-sign him or trade him? And what do you think about the whole situation of like what's going to happen?
Well, I'm going to say this. I think it depends on where the Cubs stand over the next 4 weeks and some change, with the trade deadline coming up on July 31st. And it depends not only where they stand in the standings, but what direction does the Cubs front office want to go in? The way I see it, with Cal Hendricks just not coming back into the mix, who had a great outing in his last appearances, we know went 7 2/3 with no hit allowed and nearly threw a no-hitter after going 8 solid strong in a Cubs win this past Saturday. But getting back to Stroman, it depends on what direction the Cubs organization really wants to go. If you want somebody that's still young in the prime of his career, then you're going to have to pay him. If you don't, and you want to seek to develop, your young, talented arms, then you can do that. But I think it's going to depend on where they are in this division. And if this division continues to go as it currently is, where teams at the top aren't playing up to par, such as the Milwaukee Brewers, who are 2 games out of first place and are currently riding a 6-game losing streak, and you continue to take care of business, if you're the Cubs, winning games at home this weekend and beyond, when you go on the road to face Pittsburgh, you're going to have a chance. So it depends on what direction do they want to go. If it was me personally, if I know a guy wants to be here like Marcus Stroman does and has been adamant about letting that be known, I'm going to seek to re-sign him personally if I'm Jed Hoyer in that front office. I think he's been an invaluable presence for the Cubs. And when you talk about a Cubs team that does not have the starting pitching on the level of some other teams around the league, you want to at least keep that veteran arm intact while you still have some young arms coming up. Because if I'm not mistaken, the Cubs have a prospect, and his name is slipping my mind. I believe he's in South Bend right now.
Ben Brown?
What did you say his name was?
Ben Brown?
Ben Brown,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
He's the highest rated prospect since Mark Pryor that they've had among pitchers. So I don't know when he's going to be ready or what his estimated time arrival is to arrive in the show, but that's really your golden arm right now. Unless if you have any other arms that currently in the mix that you feel are capable of working their way onto the roster, either in the middle of this season or next year in 2024, then yeah, you're going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay Marcus Stroman.
Yeah, no, you're right, man. And I think it's probably between Ben Brown and Cade Horan. Those are 2 guys that have been talked about a lot. Same with Jordan Wicks, the lefty. Those are guys that have been talked about a lot. And they're developing their starting pitching and their pitching in general. But I wouldn't bank on that. Obviously, I mean, prospects are prospects until they're not, right. And I think there's a lottery tickets until anything else. But at the end of the day, yeah, I see no negatives in re-signing Stroman because he's 32, yes, right. But like at the same time, it's not a guy who relies on velocity. He's a guy who has great stuff, and it's stuff that probably is going to age very well. So I don't see why they wouldn't re-sign him. And you mentioned it too with the veteran presence. I think that'd be super important to have, and also just the fact that they already have a guy in Stroman. They already have a pairing of Stroman and Steele that's very impressive, and that's again only going to complement in the guys in the future and help out the young guys that are coming up. Because you still have guys like Drew Smiley as well. I don't know how much longer Smiley is going to be here as well, but that's another guy that would be interested, I'm sure, in getting traded. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if the division's still up for grabs, I don't see why you would trade everyone. But there's always those guys that are 1-year contracts that I guess you might be able to afford to get rid of in some cases, like a Bellinger, depending on how he's playing, or like a Mancini as well. Of course, they just brought Belly back. He's playing in his first game. He's in the lineup today at first base. He's got a lot of reps in minor leagues. In the rehab, he got a lot of reps playing first base, which he has done before, but he just hasn't in a while. And I think this kind of to bring him back faster, obviously, because I think they want him to kind of get slowly get back into things. That's probably what I put him there. But they sent out Matt Mervis. So Matt Mervis is back in AAA, and I mean, to be honest, it's probably for the better. I mean, he was struggling mightily. Like he had an OPS under 600. I mean, it was pretty bad. He's a 25-year-old. I still have hope that he could come back and still mash. But at the end of the day, got to send him down. In division race, I think it's one of those things where, like, if the Cubs were bad, they'd leave them and see what happens. But this is a team that, as you say, is still in the race. And I mentioned this last week with Miles, is like everyone's saying is like all the Cubs and Sox need is a good week, and they're back in first place talking postseason. So like it's crazy to me how close things are. So hopefully they can come back and play good baseball with Belly and all them. They got one more against the Pirates tonight as the ring played, as we said. 3 more against Baltimore this weekend at home. Then they go to Pittsburgh to play the Pirates again. So hopefully they can get some more wins and get things done. But yeah, and one more thing before we slide over to the Sox is you mentioned it before. You said Suzuki, and him and Happ have probably been the most consistent players on this team offensively. Dansby as well. Dansby's a little bit more up and down. But his defense is elite, so he's been able to kind of balance it out in a sense to still be a good player and still be a candidate to make the All-Star team, especially because of how weak the shortstop game is. So yeah, hopefully they're able to work it out and things. I like that they moved around Swanson. I don't know if you saw, but Swanson, he was batting second the whole year, the whole season, for like the first 2 months and a half. They moved him down. He's batting fifth now. And they actually have a little thing going on with like Tauchman at the top, Horner, then Suzuki and Happ. It's not very conventional. It's not something you see every day because Tauchman is a guy that they just inserted into the lineup basically like a couple weeks ago, a few weeks ago. So, but hey, it's working right now because they won the series against the Giants, won the series against the Pirates. I'm not gonna complain, but we'll see where that takes us. But we'll slide over to the south side of Chicago where the Sox are 29 and 39. They started this road trip, and then they're in LA where they split the first 2 games of the series. And man, I mean, to be honest, I thought they were going to lose the first 2 games, right? after seeing what, yeah, right. But they got some help from Jake Berger and a couple of bombs there, a couple of double cheese, double cheeseburgers, and it worked out. But there's plenty of stuff that that I want to talk to you about the White Sox. But over the last month and a half, it hasn't been too different from what the Cubs are going through with the inconsistencies. But in your eyes, what has been the issue with the Sox overall since this last time you've been on?
Same as last.
Mm-hmm.
This is a team that is still fighting day after day to get on the same page. If it's not one thing, it's another. Last time we talked, this ball club had one of the worst bullpens in all of baseball. In the month of May, they rectified that. Keenan Middleton was perfect. Didn't give up or allow a single run in the month of May. Kendall Graveman as well. Joe Kelly went on a phenomenal tear until we saw him in Detroit get rocked up a little bit, and then he kind of went back to normal, but nonetheless has been very effective this year in most situations as a high leverage reliever for the White Sox, minus in instances when he's been asked to go get a ninth inning save, which is really not his role. Kendall Graveman was lights out into this past weekend as well. But you had starters that were failing to go 6 innings. That's changed as well. Michael Kopech has been phenomenal over his last several starts. Lucas Giolito in his last start that you were on hand to see, as well as myself, against Miami in the rubber match of that 3-game series. He went 7 strong, only allowed 1 earned run, which was a solo shot to Jorge Soler on a slider that was kind of a little bit up and far too high in the zone that he just took advantage of and made him pay for. But he was solid. He gave him a chance to win. Unfortunately, Keenan Middleton, for the first time in over a month, gave up 2 runs. And then Kendall Graveman wasn't able to get it done in the 9th. You could blame some defensive miscues, not playing the line by Yoan Moncada as part of that. But this offense has been the number one missing link. It's the offense. You had a team over the weekend score 8 runs through 4 games after taking 2 out of 3 in New York. This is also a team that has gotten shut out twice, or almost got shut out twice in the last week. As we know, they lost the first game against the Dodgers 5-1. But this is what I'm seeing is just inconsistency across the board. They got to find a way to get on the same page. Bullpen, starters, and the offense. I see starters starting to go deep in the games, with the exception of Lance Lynn. The Mike Clevenger injury that happened yesterday on Wednesday night at the hands of the Dodgers. It remains to be seen whether or not he's going to have to miss a start or two, or whether it could be an injury that puts him on a 15-day IL. But we'll see. But I just got to see some consistency from these guys, and most importantly, the offense. This offense is predicated on hitting for power. And for the most part, they have not. Even during stretches when they've had their roster fully healthy and intact.
Yeah, and another, another injury that came out today was Yohan Moncada is also on the IL now as of starting today. So once you think things are getting better for the Sox when it comes to health, they just continue to go left. So yeah, I mean, and you kind of mentioned a little bit with the offense, and it seems like they're just relying on guys like Robert and Berger, and if those guys aren't producing, then they're not going to win a ball game. And I mean, you kind of saw that to a T. Last night on Wednesday night when they beat the Dodgers 8-4. Berger had 2 bombs and Robert homered last night too, right?
Yeah, Robert
homered too.
And let's not forget about Eloy Jimenez,
who
was out for the last several games after suffering an injury late in the 9th inning in that doubleheader last week against the Yankees. He came back and had 2 big hits late. Hitting that leadoff double at the top of the 8th, which led to Berger coming up at the plate and being able to hit a 2-run jack that tied the game up. And I think that's what helped them find momentum in that inning and helped them get out in front. Clint Frazier working in that bat, had an 8+ pitch at bat that culminated in a single up the middle, driving in Andrew Benintendi, who advanced to second base off of a wild pitch after being hit by a pitch. To send him on base after, Berger hit his home run. So to tie it up, but like, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a collective effort. And it can't just be 2 guys carrying the ball club, who you alluded to, in Luis Robert and Jake Berger. And those same 2 guys were the guys that played a pivotal role in helping the White Sox get a 4-run lead against the Miami Marlins in the rubber match of that 3-game set last weekend, in which they dropped after allowing 5 runs in the 8th and 9th, respectively. So, like I said, just getting on the same page, man. And Yohan Moncada's injury, it's a tough blow. But when you got a guy like Jake Berger right now, man, as hot as he is, who hit 2 home runs for you last night, that traveled 773 feet total. And if you're from Chicago, that's a special number, because that's what the area code. But it's something special to see right now. And the way that he's hitting, he's going to warrant everyday playing time at third base. And Yohan Moncada is on a hot seat when he returns. Because if your bat isn't going to be consistent enough, or you're not even going to be helpful enough offensively to the point where you're drawing walks at least once or twice for every at bat you come up, man, like, unless if you're willing to play second base for this ball club right now, I don't know how you see the field. Regardless of what your salary is, Jake Berger has become an invaluable presence to this White Sox ball club. And it's amazing when you think about everything that he's been through. Tearing his Achilles twice, dealing with mental health issues, wondering, am I going to be able to continue playing this game that I love for the rest of my early and young adulthood? He's came and saw, he's conquered. And I hope this is just the beginning of his story, but he looks like a guy who has locked down that third base job. Because when you look at this White Sox offense and you look at Jake Berger, who had to fight for at-bats, might I add, nothing was given to him, had to fight for at-bats, and is second on the team in home runs, and is starting to hit and have some timely hits on the road, something that we didn't think he could do when you look at his home and road splits early on in the year. Man, you got to give him some time at the hot corner.
Yeah, no, you're right, man. With Jake Berger, he puts the Sox in a particularly interesting situation, right, when Moncada's on the team. But man, he's alive. He's just been on fire, man. Right now, it's like he's riding a 899 OPS right now going into tonight's game. And yeah, it's just been a great story for the Sox, and with his 15 home runs and Robert's 16. I mean, that's it's, and you know what you mentioned with Eloy Jimenez, and yeah, it's good to have him back. He actually when believe it was a play where he got a double, or like he went to second on a play, but he looked like he was wincing or something, right? From his legs, so
Yeah,
right.
he
And I
did.
was
Yeah,
like,
that's
I was like, no way. I was like, come on. But luckily, nothing happened. He was able to continue the game, and nothing happened. I'm like, man, it's like this guy. You need a ghost runner for my boy Eloy, because like it's just it's rough out there for him. So hopefully nothing happens with that. But one thing I wanted to ask you was, I'm sure you saw John Heyman's comments from I think it was earlier last week, or he talked about how the Sox should still sell, and how they can get a decent return for a guy like Tim Anderson. So it's I mean, I know it's the same situation as the Cubs, where like you kind of got to see where the Sox are at the deadline. But regardless of where the Sox are sitting, let's say they're in the same position right now at the deadline. Are you still considering moving Tim Anderson? You think this would be the right thing to do, or is it one of those things where what do you hope for? Do you hope that they kind of resolve their troubles and maybe find an extension, or do you think he's going to be better off moving somewhere else? I know a lot of people have been talking about how if I forgot who said it, a journalist said that LA would like fit like a glove.
Yeah, Russell Dorsey was saying that, and
Yeah.
a lot of people have been linking Tim Anderson to the Dodgers
Yeah.
for the last several months now.
Mm-hmm.
That's no secret.
Mm-hmm.
If the White Sox were 5.5 games out of first place, and it's July 31st, I'm still playing to win. I'm gonna put it to you like this. I know a lot of White Sox fans have opinions. They can have all the opinions they want. I don't really care personally. But I'm gonna put it to you like this, because I actually know the history of the game. A lot of fans, no disrespect to them, but they're not doing nothing but watching the scoreboard.
Mm-hmm.
The Chicago White Sox have played for 123 years. They've only been to the playoffs 11 times. If you take away my birth year, which is 1993, and I'm about to turn 30 in July, they've only been to the playoffs 5 times. Winning the World Series once. And the year in which they won the World Series was the last time in which they've happened to win a playoff series. When I look at the current alignment of these divisions, and I look at the fact that you have a wild card round in baseball now, in which a third team is able to gain a playoff spot, even though I don't think that will be the pathway in which the White Sox gain one. I think their best pathway is to get to the playoffs, is winning the Central.
Mm-hmm.
I still have a chance. It's one thing if you want to trade away Lucas Giolito to fill a position of need, such as maybe, let's say, second base, or you're able to get an arm in return that can help you immediately for Lucas Giolito. But when it comes to Tim Anderson, I'm not trading Tim Anderson just for the simple fact that he's getting paid below market value at his position. Tim Anderson is on the books to make $14 million. He's not hurting you. On top of this, you're going to have $40 million coming off of the books next year with Giolito's contract and Lance Lynn, might I add, who you have a team option on. And if I was a betting man, based on the way in which he's performing right now, I don't think it's very likely that it'll get picked up by the White Sox entering 2024. Mm-hmm. So if I'm the White Sox and I'm still 5.5 games out in July, you bet your ass off I'm playing to still win. And I'm intending to be a buyer, because when I look at this division, the only team that really scares me if they get hot is Cleveland. And that's because they have great pitching out of the bullpen, and they're a fundamentally sound ball club that doesn't beat themselves. Minnesota, I'm not too worried about Minnesota. I don't think anybody in the division is. And I mean that respectfully, even in spite of the stellar play of Byron Buxton over the last several years, but we know his injury history and his health record, and it hasn't checked out. Same with Carlos Correa. and other players. Losing Luis Ariz, even though they got Pablo Lopez back in return, has hurt their offense more than it's helped it. And when I look at the White Sox, it's no different than the Cubs. You put together a good week of baseball, you're right back in it. You put together 2.5 to 3 good weeks of solid baseball, you're taking over. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, you can build enough momentum to where you got a victory locker room celebration in your clubhouse with champagne in it. Now, I understand that some White Sox fans say, well, why are we playing for Central Division championships when the goal and the objective was to win a World Series? Here's my response to that. There's levels to it. Before you get to October, you got to win-win in the regular season, in the dog days of the summer, which is where we currently are. And what does that involve you doing most of the time? Winning your division. It was never going to be easy, no matter whether or not they were 15 games up in first place or 5 to 9 games out. Baseball's never been a sport for the weak. If you're scared, this ain't for you. Just let the chips fall where they lay. And if they're in the same position a month from now, I don't see them being willing to sell, because if they were, then that would be Rick Hahn basically saying, you know what, I give up. And I don't think Rick Hahn personally is in a position to where he can be saying, I give up, when most fans on the South Side, including myself, can make the argument that his job is on the line. Mm-hmm. Just as much as this White Sox season currently is on the line, with a big stretch of games coming up against some tough teams in the AL West, such as Seattle, after this series wraps up with the Dodgers on the road. You got 3 with them, Father's Day weekend. And then you're coming back to the crib from Monday through Wednesday to play the Texas Rangers, who we know are no joke, with Marcus Stroman, who recently had like a 24 or 25 game hitting streak, and Adolis Garcia and those guys, and Corey Seager, one of the hottest offenses in baseball, led by manager Bruce Bochy.
No, yeah, you put it perfectly, man. I mean, I don't blame you at all for the way you're thinking there, because I mean, yeah, a lot of these guys are playing for their jobs, and even, I mean, hell, you could even make an argument for Goody Ford, as much as I talked about it and said, I don't blame him for that, but you never know. The Sox, the way that they're set up, they might not have a lot of patience for that. That's the way that it goes. If they have to get rid of them, like after the season because of a certain situation, whatever, it is what it is. But yeah, a lot of these guys are playing for their job, and especially you made the point with Rick Hahn. That's 100% true. And yeah, if you're 5.5, got 5.5 out in these divisions, that's like being 2.5, 1.5 in another division. It's like you're that close with these weak teams in this division. So yeah, I definitely see that. And regardless of what happens, hopefully Tim Anderson turns it on, because offensively he's been struggling, and hopefully he's able to do it. But yeah, you also made a good point too in saying, they're gonna go off on, they're gonna go off to Seattle. Then on Monday, start a series against the Rangers, who are the real deal. Which, to be honest, at the beginning of the season, I was like, I got to see more about these. I got to see more of these guys. And they're I've seen enough, and they are the real deal. There, it's gonna be a battle. I think more than people realize. With the Astros are 3.5 at back right now. But they're still one of the best offensive teams in baseball. I believe they have the highest run differential now, and yeah, they do. They're plus 145, and that's 3 better than the Rays. So they're definitely scoring way more runs than their opponents. So yeah, it's going to be a tough road in general for the Sox, whether it be just a schedule or just in general with their division. But hopefully they're able to, get on a hot streak. I know it's been rough out there, but I feel like the Sox, when you're comparing them to the Cubs, have had more hot streaks. Like the Cubs started off well, and their offense was hot. But the White Sox have had these little patches where they've just gotten they've gotten a little high. You're like, maybe they're back. But even then, I feel like I haven't seen that with the Cubs. They've just kind of been meh.
But why we're seeing it? But why we're seeing it on the South Side is because of the stellar pitching that we've seen as of late. This bullpen has been so rock solid that you have fans losing their shit because they lost 2 out of their last 3 home games at the hands of the Miami Marlins, who really put together some great at bats in the top of the ninth on Saturday and Sunday. And you have fans losing their shit over the fact that Joe Kelly, Keenan Middleton, and Kendall Graveman broke down with the money on the line, in spite of the fact that they've been money for you for the majority of the last several weeks. Now, I understand why that is, because these games matter. I'm not saying that these games don't matter. No, they do matter. And they matter even more when you suffered through a 10-game losing streak in April. But understand something. It's hard to win when your offense ain't producing consistently. Like me and you talked about this, Saul. They were up 1-0 in the top of the ninth on Saturday against the Marlins. How many games do you see in baseball in this era, in the year of our Lord 2023, that end with a final score of 1-0? It's hard to shut a team out in this era, especially when starters, even the game's elite starters, don't always go a full complete game. Because why? We worry about pitch counts. We want to preserve our guys. We don't want them overworking themselves or overextending themselves. You know, like that's going to happen. That's going to happen. But yeah, it's a testament really to the pitchers. And it's a testament to the Central, because the White Sox have actually had their 5 games over 500 against the AL Central. But they're like 13 games under 500 against everyone else across Major League Baseball. If they could fix that, I think they'll be fine. Because this division, let's just be real, it ain't that good. And if you're a White Sox fan, you really need to ask yourself, when you say, I want to sell, even if you sell, you're not fully selling. You're retooling. Because I want to ask you a question real quick, Saul. When you look at these divisions across baseball, how many true sellers do you truly see? Because outside of Oakland, Kansas City, Colorado, and Washington, I don't see a true seller. I see a bunch of teams that could easily say, you know what? We have a chance.
You're right. There isn't that many at all. And the thing is, I feel like this deadline, if I had to guess right now, might just turn into one of those things where you're just trading assets that the other team needs that you don't need, like kind of offloading, maybe even. Because and even like, because I will say this, like even Washington, Oakland, and Colorado, as you mentioned, like they don't really have much to offer in the sense of like there's a big name right out there that they could deal, that they could get, I should say, or trade, I should say. So yeah, I don't think there really isn't that many, man. And it's kind of funny because I feel like I haven't really realized it till now that there really hasn't been there isn't that many teams that are looking out there to to sell to come deadline time, and that's going to be interesting because, like I said, it's going to be teams trading players that they don't necessarily need but that are good, and to help out another team and to help themselves out. So yeah, you're right, and then that's it makes it all a little more clear of a picture because and you made a good point in saying that White Sox fans were going crazy when they lost 2 out of 3 against the Marlins, and the Marlins aren't even a bad team; they're a good team. They're actually competing for a playoff spot, right? So it's like, I don't necessarily see what's the outcry there, but. Yeah, no, I think definitely these 2 teams, the Cubs and the White Sox, these next 6 weeks are the most important part to see if you're gonna be sellers or buyers at the deadline. And to be honest, when the closer they get, I don't see these races changing that drastically because no one's been able to take a stronghold on these divisions. I mean, like I said earlier, the Pirates are in first place of the Central. They're just a game ahead of the Brewers, who have just been terrible over the last 2 weeks, and they still are, like I said, 34-34, a game back. And then in the Central for the AL Central, the Twins and Guardians have kind of been shuffling back and forth. The Twins right now are in first 3.5 ahead of the Guardians, but even then, they're not very dependable teams. And so it's going to be just a circus heading into the trade deadline, because a lot of teams are going to be indecisive of what they want to do, and all that. So it's gonna be fascinating, man. Like you said, they're continuing this road trip. They're gonna go to Seattle and I guess we said Texas as well. So it'll be fun Sox baseball for sure, as the matchups are gonna be pretty fascinating. So hopefully that works out for them. Moving on to the rest of the league, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. For sure, I wanted to ask you about this A's reverse boycott that they had against the Rays. That whole situation is just amazing to watch, because you have a team that averages probably like 6 or 7K a game, right? And the reverse boycott, for those who don't know, they were doing that because they packed the place to show that the problem is not the fan base, that they can get fans to the games, that it's just the ownership, and I totally believe that. John Fisher, all them, and with the A's management is just terrible. So and it's very unfortunate that that most likely they're going to go to Vegas, and these fans that are very loyal in Oakland, they're going to lose their team. And as I've said it before on here with Miles, is that Oakland and they're a big sports city, and now they lost the Warriors, and they've lost plenty of teams. They lost the Raiders. So it's disappointing for them. But what did you take away from that situation in Oakland, where it was a very Moneyball moment, because they had won, I believe going into that game, they had won 5 in a row, 4 in a row, something like that. I think now, let's see, now did they win today?
No, they lost today.
They lost today. Okay, so the winning streak is over.
They had came into that game having won 6 in a row.
Yeah, 6 in a row.
They swept Milwaukee in Milwaukee this weekend.
Yeah,
which is where their losing streak began.
Yeah. So that the A's were playing good baseball. They're not the worst team in baseball anymore. Kansas City is. But yeah, man, what were your thoughts on that whole situation and how that all played out in Oakland, man?
First and foremost, I just want to give kudos to the city of Oakland, to the fans in Oakland who did go out to the ballpark. But I don't feel like they had a point to prove, because one thing I know, and I know knowing Major League Baseball and following it as long as you have, those fans have always been passionate when granted a winner or a ball club that even when they weren't winning was at least competitive. I can understand them not wanting to show up and support a team in which the owner and John Fisher has not invested money into. A team who not only that John Fisher has not invested money into, but traded away a lot of key players who played vital roles in the latter part of last decade in helping the A's get to the playoffs, such as Matt Olson, Matt Chapman, Sean Murphy. I was impressed with the boycott, though, personally. I thought it was cool to see, and it showed that no matter what, you can take our team, but you can't take the heart and pride of the city away, which are the fans of Oakland. And the A's have always had a rich history. I've heard guys from the past eras that won in Oakland, such as Reggie Jackson, Dave Stewart, Vida Blue, rest in peace, talk about how the fans of Oakland is what ignited us as a ball club to win at a high level, as well as Ricky Henderson. So, it's unfortunate that they're going to leave, because that's what it's coming down to. But the thing that hurt me was how the commissioner and Rob Manfred didn't even seek to acknowledge A's fans when they announced that the A's have reached like a legislative deal with the state of Nevada on an agreement for a new ballpark in Las Vegas. To not acknowledge these fans in a market that this team has been in, I believe, since the late 1960s, it's just unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. And even though they did lose the Warriors, the Warriors only moved up the road. And Steph Curry still keeps a deep connection to Oakland. But to see the Raiders and now the Athletics move to Vegas and be in a different state, albeit a road trip away, but like to move to a different state, it's messed up. And you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen once they move to Vegas. Fisher's going to start spending money. He's going to start not only spending money to get top tier talent, but all the things that these losing years are going to reap are going to turn into prospects. And the fans of Vegas will be blessed with that. It's unfortunate. It's just very unfortunate. And I knew that Oakland was in a rough spot after watching some games the Sox had there late last year in September, because it was one game they played and I saw that the attendance there was under 10,000. I'm like, that's just not Oakland. So for them to do a reverse boycott, I thought it was cool. I thought it was creative. And it just showed like, hey, man, you could take the team out the city, but you can't take the city of Oakland away from us because we're the pride and joy of it. And I love passionate sports fans. And that Bay Area between San Francisco and Oakland, they're second to none to me. That's always been a booming market, and it always will be, whether the A's reside there or not.
You're right. You know, well said, man. And I think, you know, that is true with these Oakland fans that are so passionate, and the way that they were ignored, and the way that also, and I think you might have seen this, but a couple of weeks ago, maybe been like a month already now, but they had started having these sell the team signs, and MLB, you know, obviously, you know, when they cut up the highlights, they cut it so that you don't see that. They did that like purposely. They cut out the signs. And I was like, damn, well, like that just says it all right there. And coming from the league, the way that they're just not even acknowledging these guys, and the protests there, they're kind of shutting them up. So that was messed up. And yeah, I mean, as you said, you're right. And this is one of the wealthiest owners in the game, John Fisher.
Owns the Gap, by the way, for those that don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that as soon as they go to Vegas, it's just going to start getting players and this and that. And yeah, it's just pretty depressing thing to hear, to see, just to picture all these fans, what they're going to lose. And I've always thought of the A's as kind of like such a blue collar, you know, team and fan base. And you know, I think they've always also just kind of, you know, like I've always thought of them like that also because of like Moneyball, and seeing how, like, you know, the way thing, obviously it's all dramatized, but seeing, you know, what has happened with the teams that they've had, you know, and with analytics and all that. And then even we've seen some great teams with them, you know, in the past, you know, just seeing, you know, when, you know, they had that postseason series against the Tigers. I just remember that one that I remember the most. You know, I think, so, and I mean, my first postseason that I watched fully was 06. And I remember them going to the ALCS against the Tigers.
They did. Yeah, that was with my man Frank Thomas. That was his first season in Oakland. Yeah, and then the 02 A's, who went on a 20+ game win streak, which marked the longest in American League history, which is what brought about the birth of Moneyball, a concept that many around the league knew, but not too many people around the world knew. And now, because of Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill, I guess everybody in America now knows about it. But yeah, like, you know, they've always had great teams, you know, and those teams were fun to watch with Mark Mulder, Miguel Tejada, Barry Zito, who had the 12-6 curve on lock. So, you know, it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. And you even go back to like the 80s.
Yeah.
Like this, it's a rich history of baseball in Oakland, and it's a generation of fans that are coming up that will never know that unless if their parents tell them about it. I'm glad that I got a chance to witness just a little bit of it, but yeah, it's unfortunate. But I'm proud of the fans for at least showing up and saying, hey, it don't matter what you try to do, you can't ignore us and our impact, which they've had there for over the last 50+ years.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of the younger fans, you tell them about, you know, those teams in the, you know, where I believe they won. Did they win they won 2 years in a row? They went back to back, right? Or I think they won like 3 in like a decade.
They won 3 in the 70s.
Yeah, 3 in the 70s.
3 in the 70s from 72 through 74. And they won in 89, which was the World Series defined by the earthquake. in
Yeah.
San Francisco. They won that year, but they had a stretch from 88 through 90 where they got the 3 World Series. They won in 89 against the Giants, the crosstown rival, and then they lost in 88 against the Dodgers, in 5, I want to say, and then they lost in 90 to the Nasty Boys in Cincinnati and got swept. And that was a series in which they were favored in. But they had a great run. They've always had great runs when they had owners that were willing to invest in the team and not pull
Exactly.
back.
Yeah, no, you're right. And just kind of picturing that is crazy to me, how good those teams were, because I get to see them myself, but kind of just telling that to the younger fans and be like, hey, they were dominant, dude, in the 70s and 80s. And seeing where they're at now is pretty sad. So hopefully that they get some. I don't know what's gonna happen. Obviously, it all points to Vegas, but hopefully they get to enjoy at least these last few years, whatever they have in Oakland, before they go. The one last thing though, before to wrap things up, wanted to talk about a few all-star positions, in which obviously the voting has started now. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on a few positions and seeing who you got right now. I know we're gonna go more in depth next week on these on our all-star votes as we sit here in the middle of June, along with Miles Porter and Gabe as well. So Gabe, let's start with the shortstops in the American League and the National League. I'll go first and tell you what I got right now. But to be honest, in all of baseball, the shortstop game has been pretty weak. There's not much to pick from. In the AL, it's a little easier to pick your number one for me. It's going to be Bo Bichette with the Blue Jays. I think he's been their best player. And along him with Matt Chapman, those are two guys that have kind of been holding it down, because Vladdy hasn't done as well as a lot of people thought, at least this year. I feel like despite he's got 9 home runs right now, but he hasn't been that force that a lot of people imagine to be like an MVP candidate. Hasn't been there. But Bichette, I mean, he's got a 3.2 WAR right now, 857 OPS, with 14 homers, so he's absolutely killing it. And that was my pick. On the National League side, it was a little tougher because it was between Geraldo Perdomo from the D-backs and Orlando Arcia from the Braves. And to be honest, I thought the D-backs, they deserve a starter in the All-Star game, and I know that they're probably going to get Corbin Carroll in there. I get that, but I think the way they've been playing, I was like, I'll give them 2 on there. The Braves, they're going to have Sean Murphy, Ronald Acuna, and they still have a chance at getting Olsen in there. I know they got Freddie Freeman to battle for first base, but for shortstops, man, who do you see in the National League, American League that catch your eye? And is there anybody that maybe is different from the ones I picked at all?
Well, I think you got it right on the money on the American League with Bo Bichette. He could have easily been the starting shortstop last year over Tim Anderson, and I say that as a White Sox fan, objectively. So yeah, when I look at the numbers, Bo Bichette is doing it, and he's always been a player that's left his mark. We're talking about a guy that last year had a 5-for-5 game, if I'm not mistaken, against the Orioles, and went on a tear in late September and has just parlayed that into a stellar season starting out this year, 2023, out in the 6th. So yeah, I would take Bo Bichette in the American League. And then in the senior circuit, known as the National League, I would take Orlando Arcia. I think it's hard to deny a guy that's batting over 300. And he's batting 331 right now. Even though the power numbers aren't there, he has an 860 OPS. I believe that's the highest OPS among shortstops that are currently on the ballot outside of Matt McClain and who you just mentioned, Gerardo Perdomo, from Arizona. So like that's who I would go with. I would go with Orlando Arcia. I understand the case for Perdomo. And yeah, Arizona, they definitely deserve some all-stars for sure, more than just one. And Corbin Carroll will definitely get selected, even if he's not selected as a starter in my book. But those are the 2 guys I would go with as short for the American and National League.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, Arcia, it's kind of splitting hairs when it comes to Arcia and Perdomo. Those guys are, the guys are playing great baseball. And yeah, I mean, Arcia, right now betting 331. So, which is, to be honest, because I remember him so much with the Brewers. This might be the best baseball I've ever seen this guy play. So if he gets selected as all-star starter, I'm not gonna be mad whatsoever. And they have said too, with how elite Swanson's defense has been and his WAR, that he has a chance to I believe he's fifth in the voting as we speak. I necessarily would not pick him to start or anything like that, but they're just saying how like among the shortstops that were got contracts in the offseason, he's playing the best baseball. He's got a 2.6 WAR right now. So I think him and he's probably on the border of like making it or not if he doesn't get in through the voting. But obviously, and I would just go with Steele and Stroman for starters as of right now. Position players kind of like on the border. But when it comes to also, I wanted to ask you about outfielders, and you talked a little bit about Corbin Carroll, and I mentioned Acuna as well. But in the American League and the National League, is there anybody that stands out to you? I know for me, like I said, I'll start this time. They got I picked Aaron Judge, Randy, Jordan, and then in the National League, Acuna, Carroll, and Soto. So those are some of the guys that are out there. But give me a few guys from the American League and the National League that you've been eyeing from the outfield for each respective league, man.
I gotta give you a guy that it may come off as biased because I'm a White Sox fan, but I don't understand how he's not in the top 20 among outfield players and fan voting, and that's Luis Robert. I understand, that the strikeout numbers are high. He doesn't take walks like he should. He still got to learn how to stay off the off-speed pitches that are low in the way that the pitchers try to attack him on, and rightfully so, because he, hasn't shown consistency enough to lay off of it. But this dude is doing it all. I think he leads the league in OAA among outfielders.
Mm-hmm.
And we know his rookie season, he won a Gold Glove Award. He's been an amazing presence in the outfield when he's fully locked in and engaged to playing at a high level. And he can change games with the swing of a bat. And his power, man, is just amazing to watch. And he's a guy that I think deserves more consideration. I do agree with you in the American League that the three starters are Judge, Rosarena, and Alvarez, even though Alvarez went on the IL and is expected to miss a month of action. Mm-hmm. But if he's unable to play in the Midsummer Classic, I would love to see Luis Robert get a chance to replace him, because I feel like he's been the best outfielder that has not gotten enough credit in which he deserves for what he's been able to do throughout this year in Chicago, a year in which he's been as healthy as he's ever been and is seeking to play every single day, even through nicks and bruises that he may suffer through. As we all know, all these players suffer through anytime you're playing over the course of an 162 game season. So that would be the guy that I will watch out for in the American League. In the National League, you have guys such as you mentioned, Soto, who is a hell of a talent. But, and, we talked about Acuna, but like one guy you can't really forget about him is Fernando Tatis Jr. You just can't. Mm-hmm. That's a guy that you could watch out for. And, Jack Suwinski has had a hell of a year in Pittsburgh. Would I vote for him to be among the top three? No, but he's made a very strong case and put together a hell of a year for the Pirates. So those are some names I will watch out for.
Yeah, you're right with Tatis and all that for sure. Because I mean, those guys are some of the guys that are electric to watch. And with Corbin Carroll as one guy that I wanted to mention as well is,
you can't forget about him,
man. I mean, we were going into the season, and I'm not gonna lie, going into March, going into spring training, I had to see much of his play, and people, he signed an extension in the offseason with the D-backs, and I'm like, what are these guys doing? Are you serious? Like, they're doing an extension with the dude who probably played like 50 games. And then I watched this dude play in spring training. I know it's spring training, but this dude was hustling, getting doubles, triples. It was flying. And I was like, all right, now he's got my attention. And now I watch D-bag games, and this guy's, for real, in my opinion, you could argue, top 15 player in the league. Like, it just is. Like, every way, sense of the game. Like, he's one of the fastest. He has power. He's hitting for everything. And it's just, it's insane, man. And I think for how young he is and for how good this D-backs team is, this is going to be trouble in October for whoever faces the Diamondbacks, because I think they're going to be there in the postseason. I think they're going to get better at the deadline. Yeah, it's scary, honestly.
Arizona's a very scary team.
Yeah,
I agree with you, man. I love what I've seen from the young talent there. I got a chance to see them a little bit up close in person before Corbin Carroll got called up with the likes of Christian Walker and Merrill Kelly and those guys. And they came in and handled business against the Sox and swept them. And they have parlayed that into a phenomenal run in 2023. And Corbin Carroll is the epitome of a 5-tool player, man. And he don't even have to hit for power in order for you to know that he's there. And the D-backs organization has been blessed with great center fielders in the past, such as Chris Young, AJ Pollock. And now to add Corbin Carroll to the mix, who, man, is one of the most electrifying young players to watch in this game right now. I love it. And I definitely think he's deserving of his first All-Star nod in Seattle come July.
Yeah, no, you're right. And man, I remember Chris Young back in the day. I mean, I remember him particularly because of the fact of those 07, 08 Diamondback teams. That they upset the Cubs in 07 in that in that 3-game sweep. That was yeah, I remember that. But yeah, no, they've been playing great baseball, and good for them, man. I mean, they deserve it, honestly, and they have a great young team, and like I said, they're only going to get better. And I mean, you look at that rotation with Gallen, Merrill Kelly. They have a talented rotation there, and they can only add to that. And it's gonna be a fun ride. But though we just touched on a few of the All-Stars, so we'll leave that for a different time where we look in more in depth on each position and all that as well. But I think that's a good place to wrap things up for this edition of the At Bat Baseball podcast presented by WARR Media. Of course, you can check out all our content. Gabe, I'll let you talk a little bit more about Open Run and why people should watch it, man, since you're here.
Oh man, you just got to check it out if you like good conversation about basketball in the game. We break it down on all levels, not only just what you see on the hardwood, but what you're seeing on the business side, the latest rumors and insight and all that, with me and Josh Hicks, we coming at you every Wednesday, dropping new stuff and talking about the game that we love. So yeah, I mean, if you just a true fan of the game and a purveyor and a student of the game, it's the podcast for you to come to and listen to, man. And we appreciate all the love and support.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And of course, check out all our WARR socials, with we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, YouTube, all that stuff. Follow us at WARR Media. So for Saul Rodriguez, Gabe Wilkins, hopefully enjoyed this edition of the At Bat podcast, and we'll see everybody next week.